Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and partner, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today is an interesting day. Today of all days, we're just having a preliminary conversation about things that are going on in the world. The conversation around diversity and all that it means is more poignant today than it seems like it's ever been. Maybe that's always been that case, but today we're going to have a lively discussion with our special guests. So thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for a great episode of Just Two Dads. Welcome, everybody. Another episode of Just Two Dads. Again, I am Brian Altunian here with Shawn Francis. We are, for the moment, live on Facebook Live. I think that may be changing at some point in the future. And if so, we'll let you all know what's happening. We're a little bit at the mercy of our social media platforms to get our word out and get our podcast out. But thankfully, if you don't catch us live on Facebook, you can catch us on our YouTube channel at Just Two Dads as well. We're also on podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, everywhere you can get podcasts. And we are down on WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Welcome to everybody who's listening in there. And on Roku channel under Empower Media Communications as well. We're all over the place now. So word is getting out. 3 years ago, Shawn and I were guests on a podcast and had such a great conversation with a couple of other dads. As it turned out, that podcast episode never aired. And Shawn and I looked at each other and we thought, why aren't we doing a podcast? We have met some phenomenal people servicing the special needs community and talking about the things that matter to our families in that community. And more importantly, we found amazing warriors who are doing phenomenal work for families in the special needs community that, by the way, that work transcends special needs and goes into every area of our community. And so we thought, hey, man, we're not experts. We're just two dads of children with special needs issues. But, it's not really about us. It's about our guests. And today is no exception. We're excited to have our guest on today. Before we introduce her, I'm going to throw it over to Shawn Francis. Shawn, my friend, how are you feeling today, buddy?
Blessed and thankful, ready to jump right into it.
Love it.
What's interesting about our guest today is that she doesn't work particularly in the special needs community, but our work is an example of how we have more in common than otherwise, and goes back to everything that this show has taught us about the fact that, there are special needs as far as accommodations go with regard to someone that has a cognitive delay or a developmental delay or a catastrophic injury or something like that has made them quote unquote disabled. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to be seen. Everybody needs to be heard. Everybody needs to know that they matter and that they are loved. And the person whose work is doing that on such a grand scale is none other than Miss Sequoia Houston. Welcome, Sequoia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we are glad to have you here.
Sure.
So we usually begin by having someone, the work that you do to contribute to society as a whole, including the special needs community, is heroic work. Most heroes don't see themselves as that, no matter how bright their suit or how long their cape. But the truth of the matter is, I think that what you're doing is in fact heroic, and all superheroes have powers which come from their origin. So tell us a little bit about you and how you grew up and what got you into the work that you do, specifically as it relates to today's topic, which is diversity.
Yeah, thank you for that. I certainly don't see myself as a hero by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even know, and I'm trying to think about how I grew up, like if that even has any factor. And maybe it did. I'm a military brat, so I lived a lot of different places growing up. I did also spend a lot of time with my grandparents as well, from 1 to 7. But yeah, I spent a lot of time moving around different places, getting to know different people and being in different environments. And maybe that is why diversity always stood out to me. So my job itself, how I make money and earn a living, is through marketing. And I've done marketing, sounds crazy, but for 15 years now, a little over 15 years now. And when I would be in these rooms, I would notice a lot of times we would have a campaign going and there would be no diversity at all in the campaign, whether that was diversity of age, diversity of gender, diversity of race, all of those different things. And I was usually looking around and wondering why nobody else said anything. And because no one else said anything, I was, hey guys, it's just wasn't sure if you were aware, but like,
Yeah.
and so that became a thing. And so I started my own marketing agency. And because I do my own thing now, and I go back and forth between working exclusively for myself and working for others. But because I get to do my own thing, I get to work on the projects that I'm excited about. One project I was working on in 2016 was with a client that did auto insurance. And so I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. We were doing a website and some other marketing collateral. I was like, everybody needs auto insurance. This could be a super diverse campaign. It's going to be awesome. I go to the stock media websites and there's something that happens with a marketer that you just forget every time that diversity doesn't really exist in those areas. You forget, and then you get there and then you're looking for images and you're like, gosh, here we go. And so I couldn't find much. And I think that's one thing that people get confused about, because they're like, well, of course there are images featuring diverse folks, but then you have to look at the tone of an image, the texture of an image, the image itself, does it match? They were launching an app, so we're looking for happy people smiling on cell phones, right? That's very specific. And then you have to look, does it have the same color, texture, and all of that stuff with what we're doing? Because one, if we can't find it, then we have to either create it, or we have to take what they have and then go back and somehow manipulate it so that it fits. All of that takes a lot of time and energy and sometimes money that a client might not have, that we might not have if we're doing it in-house. And those are things that people like fail to realize when they're thinking, oh no, there's some diversity, or oh, you're just making a big deal out of it. No, it has real ramifications. And so I was thinking, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a website, so I could just create this thing. Actually, before that, I was like, there has to be something out there that's just diverse images. There has to be. And I looked and I didn't really find anything. And I was like, oh, at the end of the day, it's just a website. So let me just create the thing. I'm already doing websites or whatever. And I tell people that was either like my best idea ever or it was my worst idea ever, because it's not just a website. There's so much that goes into it.
Right.
And I learned that very quickly, but it's been an amazing journey. And so because of my work with mochastock.com, which is the website that I developed, I've been invited into these conversations around diversity. And so, I feel like it's very integral to who I am as a person. It's integral to the work that I want to do in the world and the change I want to see in the world. I just want people to be able to see themselves, particularly we spend money with these brands, and it's not fair for you to spend them to be okay with our money, but not okay with showing the people who actually participate in their brand. So that's one thing. Plus, I just think, like I said, I grew up in, very diverse environments. I went to magnet schools that were artificially mixed and things like that. And so I'm just really used to seeing a diverse world. And it's odd to me that the things that I would see out in media and in the world just weren't.
Tell me something.
I was just saying one thing.
Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Just for the audience to know too, diversity just means difference, right? It just means something is different. It's not, because we talk about neurodiversity when we talk about people who have challenges, whether it's autism or again, or the cognitive difference. We call them neurodiverse, or neurotypical would be one side of it, right? But diversity is a broad. I mean, it's a broad. Has a broad range of things, right? Yeah,
it's very broad. So it's funny because we actually posted something on our social media this week, and it's a quote from Henry Louis Gates, and he talked about, his quote says, diversity doesn't mean black and white only. And I think a lot of times when we get into this conversation about diversity, we talk about it from the standpoint of, oh, black people, white people, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, and it's not just that. We talk about it from a racial standpoint. I remember doing a campaign for a nonprofit that I was working for, and it was for their big conference that was coming up. And we had hired an outside design firm, And our audience for the conference, the members of the organization, was 55% white women over the age of 50, right? In the collateral, they had these happy young co-eds smiling and drinking champagne for the happy hour type events and things like that, but they didn't represent the people in the actual organization, right? And so if you're not going to use imagery from the actual organization, you want to at least make sure that the imagery you use is representative of the people that you're catering to, right? And so I mentioned, hey, we need a little bit more diversity. And I very specifically talked about age diversity in that. And I remember one of the people from that organization going to look at my LinkedIn profile, and they saw that I was Black. And so the next iteration of designs we got had all these random Black people sprinkled through. And I was like, that was not what I was saying.
Good intention, but missing the mark.
Reaction, knee-jerk response.
Tell me something. Tell us about the term artificially diverse. I've never heard that term before, but I get some clear images as to maybe you just gave an example of it.
Yeah. Well, so when I said, I think you're talking about when I talked about when I went to magnet schools. And so I went to these magnet schools that were, you had to apply to get in. And so that they can make sure that people had access, they would limit the applications to 33% Black, 33% white, 33% Hispanic, 1% other. And so all my life, like I went to middle school and high school in these environments. And so I went to this utopia in school, and then I graduate and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
So, and then, I mean, I also lived in really diverse cities. So I went to college, to undergrad in Houston. Houston is a diverse city. I live in Los Angeles now. Los Angeles is, a really diverse city. I lived in Maryland, in the Maryland, DC area. It's diverse, but it's interesting because I saw probably more Black people than I've ever seen in my life there.
In the DMV,
in the DMV.
Yes.
So I've lived in diverse spaces, but it's just interesting that when things are getting better now in the media, but for a long time you didn't see that. You wouldn't think that the world we lived in was as diverse as it is based on what we would see on TV or in ads and things like that.
Right. Well, when you think even of just special needs in and of itself, Brian and I talk about this all the time. It's like we created this show to be a diverse when it comes to the special needs component, but because my experience is with autism, because of my son and his diagnosis, if I'm not careful, I can be, we can almost be seen as an autism show if I'm not constantly thinking of we should never go weary of the work, because it is work, of being curious about what it's like to be in other people's shoes. Don't ever get so comfortable to think, oh no, I'm an empathetic person. I just am. The more you say that, the more you can slip away from it, because human nature, we're, and I'm not a scientist, but since we're created to survive, our first thoughts are, what do I need? Not just what's in it for me. But as a hunter and gatherer, your thought is like, what do I need? How does this affect me? This relates to me. Oh, wait a minute, you too. It takes work to think about others, which is something we need to constantly do, though.
Yeah, I think too, we also have to be mindful of the fact that we're not going to get it right all the time. And sometimes we're going to have these intrinsic biases that we just have developed by, nurture, by the things that we've seen and we've been around. And I'll give an example of that. I posted a video on Facebook the other day, and it was Howard Stern from like early 90s. And it was a weird video. It was weird. And there was a little person in the video. And so one of my friends commented, and she was like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. First the little person, and then this and this, whatever. And so it struck me because I have an episode that's coming up in season 3 where I'll be talking with someone who has dwarfism and talking about some of the things that we think about that, right? And seeing that even as a form of diversity and the bias against that. I mean, and even to be honest, when I went to a podcasting conference, which is how I met him, and he was one of, if not the only person there, that that had dwarfism. And so I immediately, it immediately stuck out to me, right? And so it's like, well, is that something, like, why did that stand out? And just taking the time to understand that, right? And it doesn't mean that there's anything bad or anything wrong or anything there. I think where it gets to be problematic is when you behave negatively or treat someone differently based on their difference, right? That's when it gets to be an issue. But I think if we all learn to, be honest about our thoughts and feelings and reflect within self and try to understand what they mean. Like I asked my friend, like, why was it that stood out to you that there was a little person in this video clip, right? Like, what was it about it? And I, was thankful that she didn't get offended, because even that could be, offensive, because I didn't want her to think I was trying to call her out, because it wasn't that.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted, one, to know, for reference, and then two, to have us all think about what is it that we think when we see these different things in the world or see people who are different from us, and our initial reaction, and take time to sit with that for a minute.
What's interesting is you're talking, I'm thinking about, from the time that we're young, we're taught to look for differences.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember Sesame Street was filled with, like, one of these things is not like the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you identify the differences? And I remember those highlights magazines, which had all those pictures with all these hidden objects,
right?
Right. Because if you look at the world, you're like, you don't see it, but now if you're called to look for something specific, you look for those things that are different. And I'm wondering if there's some sort of indoctrination in our society that has us look at the differences as and maybe as a differences as a thing that we start to look at. Because as you were talking about your example of your friend, maybe that's not something that's evident in her world, and so it stands out because we've now been trained to sort of look at differences. When right at the end of the day, if you're an empathetic person, and Shawn said before we even got started, diversity is another word for empathy. If you're an empathetic person and you accept the world as is, you're not looking at the differences as something to separate, but just something that exists, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think if we're looking at it from that standpoint, that's completely fine. I think that the tricky part is that we don't always stop there, right? We don't always say, oh, that was interesting, and then move on, right? There's a book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. And I started a book club with my podcast last year. And that was I think the first book that we read. And she talks very specifically about the caste system in India, but how in the United States we've created a caste system based on race, honestly, right? Yep. And how a lot of times people look at they'll think, oh, I myself am not racist because I don't burn flags in a yard, and I would never ever, I don't burn crosses, and I would never, hang someone from a tree, and I would never do these terrible things. I'm not racist, right? But there's also this benefit that people get from certain systems, right? And that is also a part of the caste system. It's what she says is they may not necessarily do something that's racist, but they're not stopping I can't remember how she put it.
They're not providing a deficiency. So it's not like they're going out of their way to not nourish the environment.
There's still this expectation that being a part of a certain group allows you certain benefits and privileges. And I may be okay with something, right? And I may say, oh, I'm not racist, but if I feel like someone is in a group that is lower on the totem pole than me, and they then get a benefit that I did not get, then I might feel that that's problematic. So you think there was a girl a few years ago who didn't get accepted into University of Texas, UTA, and UT Austin.
UT,
and she, UT, yeah. And so she was she did this whole lawsuit and was really frustrated because she thought that she should have gotten in, and she talked about other people getting in over her. And she wasn't mad that people of color or other folks got in. She just didn't think they deserved to get in over her because of where her privilege put her, right? And I think we also have to look at that. And I think even further than the idea of race and us creating this caste system based on race, I think we all create these mini caste systems or these mini systems of class that we adhere to daily, right? That we, you go somewhere and you feel like, oh, we look at the little person, for example, in that situation, like there's this idea that she thought that they were, my friend who commented thought that the little person was being exploited. And so I was like, well, why can't the little
Mm,
person just be there?
right.
Why
You
can't that
know.
just be, why can't they just be existing in their everyday life?
Hmm.
And there's this idea that, there are these, these levels that we put people in almost automatically. And it's, I think, a matter of nurture versus nature, because we are socialized to believe certain things, whether we
Yeah.
want to believe it or not.
Well, the manner in which we separate ourselves from each other is just, it's as, if not, it's so it's just as insidious, if not more, than it is obvious. And you think
Mhm,
of like a special needs component. It's just a
mhm,
desire to be heard, and I don't know if this is the universe putting these things in front of me, but I've been in communication a lot lately with people who have gone very public with the tantrums that their child has, or I shouldn't even say tantrum, that's the wrong word, meltdown, that
mhm,
occurs due to the child being on the autism spectrum. And one gentleman in particular, as I was looking at it, he was sharing, as I was reading his words, I was thinking, I've never shared the experience of my son having a meltdown in public. And when those things first happen, the first thing you're thinking of is like, take the word special away. We just want to blend in right here, right now. I don't want anybody looking.
mm,
I just want to be, loved and just understood, and
right,
depending on your level of security, you might be thinking, oh, they're looking at me. What are these people thinking? The higher your level of security, the more your
right.
thought is like, let me protect my child. These people are staring at my child. And that's the lesson in diversity that comes with something like that, not being invited to maybe the birthday parties or certain family gatherings or anything like that, because your situation is so quote unquote different.
Right.
I'll, if I live to be 500, I'll just never stop. And the passion with which you hear me say everybody needs to be seen, everybody needs to be heard, you would I think I've known that all my life, but at the same time, it's like a revelation taking place like now, to really stop and think of what it feels like to not be in another person's shoes. And
Right.
that is really the key to what's going to save and change the world. We talk about love, we talk about political things, we can talk about all these things and get on as big a soapbox as we possibly can, but the commitment to never tire of being curious about somebody else's shoes is everything to making this world a better place. Everything, even economic. I could just go on and on.
Yeah. Being curious, I think, is a start, but also creating spaces for people. I think one
Right.
of the best unintentional outcomes of this whole pandemic is that we got to work from home, and there were people who had an opportunity to get jobs that they felt were better suited for them, and their difference in ability than they would may have been able to get otherwise, right? And that's something I think is really great. Somebody to do something that they feel fulfilled in versus something that they're doing just because they need to make money, and that's the only thing that they could get because they can't go into an office every day. And so it's concerning to me now with so many people doing this back to office and not being open to remote. And I'm thankful for the organizations that are, because there are a lot of organizations that have said, hey, we believe in this flexibility and we're going to continue it throughout. But there are a lot of organizations that are on that opposite end that said, no, everybody needs to come back at least half a week. And it's like, well, where does that leave people who may have been able to be a great fit for this, this role or this organization, but they live, somewhere far away because, being in the city is too much for them,
Right.
different things like that. And it's just, it's really sad. And I hope that benefit that people were able to experience as a result of this isn't fully lost.
I think dealing with people as you're describing, it's no different than corporations and industries. There's a lot that's invested in an infrastructure, and so change oftentimes requires just to discount the legacy that's been invested. So, for example, just from a technology perspective, 5G technology, our wireless technology, our Internet of Things, the Internet as it exists, Web 3.0, all of the stuff that's coming, the biggest challenges to it have been well entrenched, well established, the old staid, infrastructure that telecom companies had invested in the old system, right? And so in a way they were like, no, we're not going to embrace that change yet because we've invested so much here, and we have to get our ROI out of this first before we can embrace change, right? And so advancements in technology are often brought about by those folks who are like, I don't really care about the old establishment.
Right.
I'm gonna go out here to to where it's going to benefit the greater amount of people. Again, as much as Elon Musk has been in the news lately, the reality is Tesla and solar, really went up against conventional technology. And his perspective was, the future is here. I get it, you don't want to let this go, but here's where the future is. And so this is where we're going to invest all of our time and effort. A lot of that same thing exists with companies, to your point about those people going back to work. We're like, look, we've just built these massive office buildings. We've invested all of this money in infrastructure to support you being here. Now we gotta have you, work from home. By the way, we invested a ton of money to give you equipment and stuff to be successful at home. You'd think that there would be. Anyways, the point is that a lot of times change requires the letting go of well-established infrastructure, whether that's physical infrastructure, technological infrastructure, technical infrastructure, or mindset to some degree, right? Where we've got to allow the concept of evolve or die, right? That's the reality is you have to evolve or die. A lot of the challenges we're seeing, and I'm gonna go now full on political here. A lot of the challenges we're seeing in the country right now is exactly that. The status quo. We've developed so much. We've got so much entrenched in this old white culture that anything that comes up against it, we got to fight to hold on with every ounce of energy we have left.
Everything we got.
Yeah,
we got to hold on to it. In fact, we're gonna outlaw all this other activity and all this other stuff, and because we've invested so much in our conservative perspective on life, and and that challenge is going to eventually, like everything else, it's eventually going to it's going to succumb. It's going to evolve or die, and that we're seeing it right now. The Supreme Court leak, of the potential of the change of Roe v. Wade and all of this stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
All of the issues of diversity, as we're talking about in our cities, all of the challenges that women are facing, that non-white, citizens of the United States, deal with on a daily basis. It's a challenge to the status quo. And so it's going to take a lot. But the reality is, again, they're holding on because this is a well-entrenched infrastructure that they need to figure out how to let it go.
Yeah.
Gracefully. And I don't think there's ever such a thing as a graceful,
transition.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to everything we're saying. It's just that idea of and I think it's actually kind of subconscious, and then in some cases very conscious and blatant, where it's just like, no. This is about me. What about me? What about my pie? What about what I know? What about my, even if I'm going to manufacture a threat, a threat to a way of life that I propose, but don't even necessarily live in some cases too, which is a whole nother story. But go ahead, I cut you off, Sequoia.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because if you think about, there's a quote or a thought that the greatest fear of anybody, and the thing that kind of leads to all of the things that we do, and the motivation for everything that we do, is the fear of death. Right. And so in all things, whether it be this political death that we're talking about or people's actual livelihood, they feel like this is going to lead to a certain death for them, right? And even if you think of like you think of viruses or you think of any organism or whatever, they always fight for survival. So it's not
Mhm.
unthought of that there would
Yeah.
be this fight for survival.
Yeah.
But I think in this fight we have to decide, are we going to be the virus or are we going to be the anecdote? You know, are we going to be the antidote, the thing that saves us all and saves the greater
Right.
good?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it really is interesting, and you know, you see this, you know, even the, you know, what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine, and you know what's happening in Europe, what's happening around the world, as again, as the world, you know, emerges from this pandemic, which by the way is not over.
At
Right.
all.
Not
Right.
over. We've
Right.
acted like, oh well, it's over, so let's live in a post.
It's just
we joke about
morphed.
it.
Right.
Yeah, we
Right.
call it post-pandemic, but the reality is we've lived in a post-pandemic world for at least the last 100 years since the last massive, you know,
Right.
pandemic wiped out, you know, so many people. But you know, again, it's challenged who we've been, right,
Yeah.
and who we see ourselves to be, and what we know, and so the idea change is hard, right? Change is hard for people, but there is this inevitability. The fact that we're doing this right now, of course, the funny thing is we all live in the same general area of Los Angeles, but we've done this, you know, with people from other parts of the world, other countries, you know, other parts of the
Mhm.
US. We have Zoom calls, Shawn and I, in our business that we're in. We've done Zoom calls with hundreds, thousands of people from Hawaii to the East Coast and up into Canada, you know, all simultaneously attending, you know, a presentation. And now because, you know, some of our restrictions have relaxed, now we want to just go, okay, well, this part is over, so let's go back to the offices and the old way of doing things, because that doesn't even make any sense anymore.
Right.
Like, why would you do? That's like saying, hey, well, you know what? Gas has gotten to be $6 a gallon. All right, horse and buggies, let's bring them
Right.
back because
Exactly.
this clearly is not working. That makes no sense,
Right.
Right.
and that's the challenge. And most people are like blinded to that, but that's kind of what's happening. I know we've totally gone off topic here, but the idea that the reality is embracing our differences, something that Shawn and I say all the time, embracing our differences is what takes us into the next evolution of where we're going to become the antidote, as you said, as opposed to the virus. What happens now, and often happens, if you know anybody who has survived cancer, a lot of times what happens with somebody who's fighting cancer in the later stages, as they get very sick, there's a period of time when they have tremendous amount of strength. It's almost like the body, like a last fight, it rallies and then eventually succumbs, right? And what we're seeing right now in the United States here, and what we're seeing now, I think, is we're seeing this, by the way, all over the world, where this sort of conservative political mindset is still popping up. We're seeing this last fight, this last rally, like, no, we've got this. We can hold this a little bit longer. But the reality is the future is coming in. And, you know, my hope is that change is going to be, you know, something that comes swiftly more than, you know, what we've stuck with, because what we've stuck with has changed for a reason. The reason why we had Roe v. Wade, the reason why we've had a lot of the, you know, the amendments that exist, why we've given rights to gay marriage and other things for evolution and for progress, was done for a reason. To go back and eliminate all of this now is that fighters, you know, last hope to hold on to something that they've known. The reality is it's not going to last. It's going to succumb at some point here. It has to. And by the way, people like you, when I say people like you, I mean fighters like you who recognize the need for just common sense in a marketing initiative, like willing to have a podcast that talks about diversity and is bringing these conversations and continue to have these conversations and continue to bring. This is why, you know, this is why we're going to see the change, because you are not afraid. You're not afraid to, you know, step in the face of it and have the difficult conversations. Shawn and I have talked about we fight, and I'm sorry, I'm going off the soapbox.
No.
I'll be done here in a second.
It's okay.
Shawn and I talk about the fact that we fight for the rights and the need, the support, awareness, acceptance of folks who have neurodiverse issues. And by the way, we take a very lovely, friendly, because we love each other. Shawn and I have similar, ideas about how the world works. We talk about this stuff all the time. We're constantly like, if people didn't know, people would think that we were married. Like, we spend so much time together and talking and communicating with one another. It's almost like, Shawn, I can't talk to him anymore. Like 8 hours today is enough. Like, we're so aligned, but we haven't really taken like any controversial perspectives on things, because the reality is we agree with each other on many fronts. And this is one of those things where, thank God, we have folks like you out there who are willing to, step in the face of, you're up against a lot more, sort of, I'd say, intense reaction to the world than we are, because you're like diversity is right, like in your face.
Out there, you're out there,
kind of things.
It's interesting too. So one of the things that was really disheartening for me with starting was, I do marketing for a living. And so running ads is just part of what I do. But running ads for the podcast has been so hard, because you'll get these people, these trolls, these folks that'll come on and they'll say that diversity be like, why don't you speak English? Or they'll just say, stop, pushing your hate rhetoric and all of this stuff. And it's like, did you even listen to the podcast? Like, they'll say things like,
it's for you too.
Yeah, they'll say things like, I'm against white people and I'm against this. And I'm like, I'm not against anybody at all. Right. And that's the whole point, it's the whole point of it. And I even go out of my way to look for, because one of the things that is interesting with the diversity conversation is that I feel like for white men, cisgender white men, a lot of times they feel like they're edged out, because they feel like diversity is everything but cisgender white men. And that's not the case, right? So when we talk about the guy that suffers dwarfism, cisgender white man, when we talk about, other people, maybe neurodivergent, like you mentioned, or different things like that, there's room for everybody, because diversity is very broad. And I think once we get to that point where people stop seeing diversity as this, cuss word, and start seeing it for what it really is, then we'll be in a better spot.
The reality, as a cisgender white male speaking, I have a daughter who has neurodiverse issues. I have daughters. I could just stop right there. I have daughters, right? So women's rights are important to me. Special needs rights, those are important to me. Again, I can say I come from my mother's Jewish. Like, I have there's a lot of reasons for me to. I'm impacted by this as well. I'm not feeling edged out. If I'm feeling edged out, that's AT&T holding on to that infrastructure. I'm feeling included because either I'm part of the conversation today, or I will be edged out, right? Yeah. Secondarily is I'm getting older. I'm eventually going to become part of the special needs community by the fact that I'm going to need help, support, accommodations just because of my age. Ageism is a component of this diversity conversation as well. So
sure is.
Us fighting this as if we're being left out of the conversation. I had a friend who said, "Hey, my child is being taught in school that he should apologize because he's white. He should feel bad because he's white." I'm like, "You're an idiot. That's not what that conversation is all about.
Right.
That's the most insane. Like, you holding on, by your fingernails to something you're grasping, hoping that you don't get cut. What are you even talking about? Get in the conversation and stop fighting this conversation." It just is insane to me.
Right.
And there's 50 different ways. There's so many things that we say where we talk about questions are more powerful than statements. Diversity is just another word for empathy. Just like ask questions. And if the only stupid question is the one that's not asked. So that's why if you take a bunch of kids at a certain age and stick them in a sandbox, they're going to ask what we might be afraid to ask. They might ask the person of color, "Hey, do you get sunburned? Is that possible?" And just be curious about each other. And that's the other thing, is that we're so uptight that we think that certain things are racist. And sometimes a person who's not inherently racist can ask a racist question. I know that there's someone, she's actually going to be a guest on the show coming up. She posts very, very candid things about her daughter's situations with regard to her diagnoses, which includes autism, and some of them are meltdowns and things of that sort, because she's trying to bridge the gap between, the community and understanding. And our whole thing is like, I want people to, ask questions, don't be afraid. And that's something I've never dared to do. But the questions that some people will say, you got her on display, or this is the way again, within the special needs community, there's a specific term you use. There's a specific way to advocate. Everything is about, this is me, this is what I do. And if you're not doing that, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Right. And we have to get away from that.
Right.
Well, and I would say this, and I just put it up on the screen, Joe, who happens to be my daughter, not happens to be, she's my daughter. She talks about diversity being a gift, and it's such a poignant comment that she made about that when you're different, you see the world differently. And that's the point, right? Shawn and I agree on so many things, but Shawn and I look at the world completely differently.
Yeah.
Shawn's from the Virgin Islands. I'm from California. Those are just that alone. Just
you have different experiences and perspectives and thought, you know what I mean? Like your 100%. Lived experiences are different, and you can't possibly think the same on everything, even if you do agree. And I think that's another thing. It's okay for us to not agree with certain things.
That's the thing right there.
Right.
It's like another getting along means that we have to agree. So therefore, if you don't agree, and that's part of our evolution too. Yeah. If you don't agree with me, there's like a real problem. Like we can't actually just have an honest discussion and arrive at, you know what? And look, for the most part, my life was like a barbershop, especially as a Black person. You know what that's like. I guess it's not much different than going to a beauty salon, but you go to the barbershop, people are either talking music, sports, or politics. And guys are up in arms about how they feel and who the best player is or what candidate they like or whatever have you. And minutes into the conversation, no mind is going to be changed, but you're still getting more of a workout than you would picking up all the weights in the world. Right. Whereas at the end of the day, you can just be like, at this point, I'm sorry, I'm on a tangent now too, but I remember somebody asking Kobe Bryant a question about, how do you feel about when, compared to Michael Jordan or LeBron James and the best player ever? And I remember Michael Jordan saying, I don't get into that because you just, that's for other people to, how do you decide who's the best of all time? And Kobe's response was even a little deeper than that. He was like, I don't engage in an argument that I honestly can't win. And that's a guy who lived to win. So what he's telling you is, if your position is here and mine is here, and we can't meet in the middle, I'm not even going to have the discussion. That's so much evolution. That's what everybody needs.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because you talked about Elon Musk, Brian, and even with him and all the things that he's done to change the world, regardless of what you think of him, because some people think he's a genius, some people think he's crazy, but even he is neurodivergent as well. I believe
Absolutely.
He has Asperger's.
Asperger's, yeah.
And so, you even think about that, where somebody who is differently abled has this great ability to lead all of this change. And I think if we allow, and maybe it's not allowing, if more space is open for people to, whether they create it, whether it's we create spaces that are more inclusive, then we are going to be able to see these massive changes and shifts in the world, because we are able to view the world through a different lens and see things differently and make different decisions. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
One of the greatest services he ever provided was when he hosted Saturday Night Live, and in his monologue, he said, I have Asperger's. I'm not crazy. I just see the world. I process the world differently. And that statement alone progressed the conversation around diversity, almost more than anything else, only because it's sort of like, that is the point. We all process this world differently. Right. The problem is that those people who feel that that's a challenge to their well-established infrastructure of thinking versus those who are like, yeah, man, look at how we're embracing again, the Tesla vehicle, how we're embracing solar technology, how we're embracing remote learning, how we're embracing remote work when by the way, if it weren't for the pandemic, which forced us to take a look at some of this stuff, we may not have gotten this far, but just a different way of thinking has has moved our world forward.
So much further. Yeah.
And by the way, I don't agree with everything that he says, and he does, and that's okay. There are certain things, like everything and everybody, I take the value from those things that I look at. I'm like, that's a meaningful way of looking at it, right? Whether we all think that him acquiring Twitter is a good thing or a bad thing is irrelevant. The bottom line is sort of like it doesn't change. That doesn't change my world day to day, right? The fact that he has a reason for doing it, and the reason he does it is his own, and he's looking at it from a different perspective. We all may look at that and go, "Huh, never really realized that Twitter could be used for that or that or that," right? It took somebody who had a different process, the way he processes the world, to bring a different approach. That is evolution. That has always been the case.
And the funny part about all of this is that there are so many people who, as adults, are being diagnosed with these different things, right? Because Chris Rock talked about being diagnosed with something. Like I have a really good friend of mine who was an adult who was diagnosed with ADD, or who got diagnosed with ADD as an adult. I'm sure a lot of us, if we went and took a test, whatever.
I haven't been diagnosed, and I know that I'm just like slip through the cracks because because you know what I'm thinking about is, like, for instance, for those of you that say you never get the diagnosis, say maybe there even isn't one. If you've just always been someone whose manner of processing thought, expressing information, you know, or anyway, just thought to be a little different, it's okay. It's quite okay. It is quite okay. You don't. The diagnosis helps because you go, aha, that's what it is. And I'll admit, I'd feel better if I had some of that. Who knows? Maybe I still will get that. You definitely would hear about it here. But you know, at the end of the day, if anybody just feels just a little different, you know, it's okay.
Yeah, I used to think I processed information slower or more slowly. It would take me a while. I mean, many people would say, like, you know, how many times have you had a conversation with somebody and then you ended the conversation, you left, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, I could have said this, or I could have said this, or now I'm thinking about this. Right? That's like that happened to me my entire life, right? In a way, my brain processes things a little bit differently, a little, you know, just in a different way. I've always felt that way, right? Yeah. The thing is, once I knew that happened, I stopped making myself wrong.
Right.
About not, and I think that's the key, right? Which the problem is, a lot of us feel that, well, you have that, so that you're wrong, right? Yes. Or you think that way, you're wrong. And this is the challenge, what Shawn was just mentioning earlier. It's like, oh, you don't agree with me? Well, you're wrong. And so, by the way, if I really don't agree with you and I get enough people to disagree with you, I'm going to make a law about it.
Exactly.
Right? To outlaw you. And then, by the way, if I'm going to use my religion, as we mentioned earlier, if I'm going to use my religion, so I'm going to damn you to jail and then damn you to hell. Like, that's a problem in our country, right? That's a problem in the world right now, where diversity of thinking is causing more challenges than acceptance, and that's where we need to have these conversations on a regular basis. Absolutely. Diversity of thought is as Jordan said, it's important to embrace that. It's important to acknowledge it and not make the other person wrong, because if you and I think differently, I think you're wrong, that means you think I'm wrong.
Right.
And people forget that. If we're thinking differently and I think you're wrong, then in your mind you think I'm wrong. Most people don't think that way. They think, oh, you're wrong and I'm right. So that's it. That's all there is to it. But the reality
is we're not going to get anywhere if we don't have these conversations, right? No. I think it's interesting too, is that, like, when you talk, to go back to the Roe versus Wade, one of the things that was really interesting this had to be 2008, 2009. It was, I got a call, you know how they do the robocalls, and it's like some politician that's calling you to ask about something. They were talking about abortion rights then. And so they asked, are you pro-life or are you
pro-choice?
Pro-life or but it wasn't even pro-choice. It was like, are you pro-life or are you pro-abortion, right? Like,
it was one of those, if you designed to get the answer they want.
Right. And so for me, it was such an odd question, because I personally don't see myself getting an abortion for my own personal reasons, right? But I will fight to the death for anybody to have that right for that choice. I think it's a very personal decision. I don't think it's fair for that to be taken away from people because somebody said it was wrong. And it's like, what makes that somebody who said it was wrong, but, and I'm a Christian. I grew up Christian. I live my life in most ways, because there are things as I'm, getting older and learning more about myself that I, that I'm questioning, right? And I think that's okay. And I think God is going to understand that. And I think he'll appreciate me questioning life than just saying, okay, I believe because that's what I was told to believe, right? But I live my life by the tenets and principles of Christianity. But I also think that there are a lot of other sentiments. Like, I have one of my really good friends practices Buddhism, and I listen to the things that she talks about, and I'm like, I get that. That aligns. I like that. That aligns with me. And a lot of it aligns with what I believe as a Christian, right? And so, it's we have to get to this point where we realize in all of our differences, which differences can be very beautiful things if we allow them to be, right? But in all of our differences, we have a lot more in common that's even different.
Oh, completely. We have a lot more in common than anything else because, everybody wants the basic things. When we talk about everybody wants to be seen, heard. Nobody goes, you know what? I want my child to wonder where their next meal is coming from. I want them to live in a world with no hope. Nobody wants that. Right. And so at this point in the show, we ask a question, which I'm always anxious to hear the answer because I always learn. I'm exceptionally anxious to hear your response to the question, which is as follows. In our ability to make the world a better place is tied greatly, at least in part, to our willingness or our ability to change ourselves, our mind, our perspective. And so with that being said, can you give us one example of a thought or belief that you once believed very strongly, but no longer believe to be true?
Oh, okay. A thought or belief that I once believed very strongly and no longer believe to be true.
And there's no wrong answer. It could be that you like vanilla ice cream and now you don't. It doesn't matter.
So the thing that comes up most, I was literally just having a conversation with someone about a situation, and we've both read the 4 agreements. And he was like, I don't know, I feel like you're not honoring agreements 2 and 3. And I was like, no, but okay, you know what? Yeah, I am making a judgment on it. Was I was making a judgment, and I was on something. And I didn't see it that way at first. I didn't see that I was doing that. And I think sometimes we do that in life, right? And it's not judgment. Let me find the actual word because I'm blanking right now because I'm on the spot. But I think we do that where where is it? I'm sorry. I made an assumption. And I think we do that where we make these assumptions. And even me, where I'm like, I have a podcast on, whatever. We do that. Right. Another example where I had to challenge my thinking, and it might not be, I don't know where I don't know where I've landed on it, but I have this podcast on diversity. And so I often challenge the way I think about certain things, particularly if it feels like I'm not operating in alignment with my personal mission. Right. And so I'm single. I hope to get married and have children one day. And because of that, I'm dating, which is a terrible thing to do. It's awful, but it's a necessary thing if you want to get married and have kids, right? And so there was this guy, and he was like, yeah, I was in prison for 14 years and I've just been out for 2 and this. And so I'm listening and I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot. And I had to think, like, am I being judgmental?
Are you judgmental? Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what is this and whatever. And I realized for me, there were a number of reasons that I was like, nah, this isn't it. One of them being that he had been in prison. And but the reasons were, I have created a life for myself that, one, my financial wellness and stability is really important to me. I have certain businesses and things like that, that I feel like inviting that into my world could be problematic for a number of reasons. But at the end of the day, I just don't feel comfortable with that, right?
Yeah.
I, as a woman who has learned a lot and who has gotten to a certain point in life and things like that through studying and through, whatever, I don't want to have to teach a grown man, how to manage finances because you were in prison for most of your adult life. You know what I mean? I don't want to do that. And is that okay? Is that judgmental? In a way it is, right? But is that wrong for me to feel that way? And I don't think it is. But that's something I sit with regularly.
Yeah. Well, it's a call because you could find out that you roll the dice and teach that, and this individual is receptive to it, and you end up adding to his life. You come together and you have a great, bountiful life as a result of it. Or it could go the other way. You just made the decision that I don't know that I want to roll the dice and head down that road to find out, because while it could go that way, I also can't get up the time that it takes to find that out. And that's a judgment call.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm getting nudged by our producer, Sean Hall, who we love dearly because he kind of keeps us on track, and he reminds us that we only have an hour show. First of all, Sequoia, this conversation, and we do say this often because we find ourselves totally engaged with the subject matter. We could go on for another hour and not even, begin to scratch the surface. So it's been amazing having this conversation with you. I put up on the screen for those who are seeing this on video, Diversity Be Like. That's the address of your podcast, right?
Yes.
And for those of you who you can see it in the comments and the notes, Diversity Be Like, and catch Sequoia's. We were guests on Sequoia's podcast, and she has amazing conversations on that podcast. So
thank you. And that episode is coming up. I cannot wait to share it.
Good. For those of you who know, we have not heard it. So unlike us, she takes a quality time to edit and actually produce her show. We do this live because
we don't do our show. We spit our show.
Well, to be fair, the editing is only for audio and only like ums and things like that. I don't edit any content out or anything like that, unless you said something that was crazy, that was going to get, everybody fired and banned and, get the US under pressure from some other country and we're going to war. Like that stuff will get edited out. But like in general, there's only one episode that I ever edited any content out, and it was just because it was so egregiously disrespectful that I was like, don't feel comfortable sharing this. Well, and it was like one sentence. So
for those who know Shawn and I, that's always a possibility, but thankfully I think we avoided that in that conversation. But as we sign off, so first of all, thank you, Shawn Hall, for always having our backs and always keeping us on track, and reminding us that it's important to embrace. By the way, it's important to embrace everybody. Shawn is in Hawaii, and does this from his home in Hawaii to keep us on track, if you can believe. And as we say at the end of every show, and I think even today is even more poignant, I always say, empathy and love is so important. Look at somebody's situation from the perspective of empathy. You have no idea what's happening in their life, what the perspective of the world is, how they process information, how they process the world. So have a little empathy and know that just because they're different doesn't mean they're wrong. Just knowing, right? That's the whole point behind diversity. And always, if you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world will look like a different place, will be a better place. So I'm going to thank you, Sequoia. Don't leave after we sign off here. Don't leave yet. We want to chat with you a little bit. But before I throw it to you, I'm going to throw it to Shawn to close us out. And thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of Just Your Dad. Shawn, if you want to.
Yes, Sequoia, I want to just thank you. This has been the most unique show that we've done so far, I think. And I think it's broadened our own horizons with regard to how we do the show going forward and the content that we cover and include. And I want to make sure that I thank the women in my life, as I always do. That includes my amazing mom, Jan, whose birthday was yesterday, and to my amazing wife, Laura. And our 17th wedding anniversary is this Friday. Time goes by
Fantastic.
fast. Without them, I would not be. And just remember that everybody needs to be seen. Everybody needs to be heard. They need to be loved, and they need to know that they matter. And wherever you are, just know that we love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.